Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into the bustle of Edo, the city we now call Tokyo, back when it was a packed, noisy maze of lanterns, alleys, and smoky air. Imagine you're shuffling along the streets at twilight. Shop signs hang overhead, glowing faintly with candlelight, while the smell of grilled eel mixes with the sharper tang of pickled radish drifting out of wooden stalls. The ground is dusty, the chatter constant, and your senses are almost overwhelmed by the sheer density of life. Somewhere nearby, a shamisen twangs a casual tune, and kids dart between legs with sticky rice balls clutched tight. You pause, stomach grumbling, only to find every other vendor hawking jars or bowls of something steeped in salt, vinegar, or miso paste. Welcome to Edo's universe of pickles. It might not sound glamorous at first. Pickles, really? But back then, these briny companions were survival itself. People relied on them when fresh vegetables vanished in winter, when long journeys demanded portable food, or when rice needed a tart little sidekick. You could say Edo life without pickles would be like modern life without smartphones. Possible, sure, but you probably won't survive this. At least, not without feeling miserably deprived. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, I'd love to know, where are you watching from tonight? And what time is it for you? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your sandals crunch along narrow lanes where houses lean in like gossiping neighbors. Paper windows glow with amber light, and the air carries a faint sting of brine from countless pickle jars cooling on verandas. These jars, glazed brown or left a rough clay gray, guard treasures like salted turnip, plum, or eggplant. You can almost taste the sharpness just from the smell. Edo's nights were rarely silent. Vendors shouted their goods, from roasted chestnuts to skewered tofu, but the pickle sellers had their own distinct cry. Some historians still argue whether those cries were melodic, like half songs, or just practical yells, but either way, they cut through the street noise. The fact is, pickling in Edo wasn't just about taste, it was necessity. Without refrigeration, the choice was stark. Preserve your harvest, or watch it rot in the humid summers and icy winters. Salt, vinegar, miso, rice bran, these were the unsung heroes of everyday survival. A mainstream truth here is that salted plums, umeboshi, became so ubiquitous that almost every lunch, rich or poor, had a crimson dot staining the center of its rice ball. That tiny burst of sour salt helped preserve the rice itself and added flavor to otherwise plain meals. But beyond that mainstream fact lies something more fringe. People sometimes believed certain pickles carried protective charms. A jar of particularly sour daikon might be tucked into a corner to ward off illness or even bad luck. Was it superstition? Absolutely. But in a time when smallpox or cholera loomed, anything that smelled pungent enough to scare away evil spirits felt worth keeping. You push past a lantern-lit stand where cucumbers glisten like emerald rods in a shallow tub of salted water. A boy calls out that they're refreshing against Edo's summer heat. And you know, he's not wrong. Cool cucumber crunch has been a summer treat for centuries. Scholars debate, though, whether Edo's commoners invented this casual cucumber snack on a stick, or whether it was borrowed from older rural traditions. Either way, on a hot night like this, You can imagine the relief of something crisp and briny on your tongue. Step closer to another stall, and you'll spot daikon radishes, pale as ivory tusks, strung up to dry before their plunge into brine. The smell is sharp, earthy, and yes, a little stinky, something you'd probably wrinkle your nose at now. Yet, for Edo, palates, this funk meant flavor. It's funny how tastes evolve. What smelled like a damp barnyard to outsiders was comfort food here. And let's be honest, half the snacks we eat today will probably horrify the future. Ever microwaved fish in an office kitchen? Yeah, Edo folks would have understood that social crime perfectly. The night thickens. Fire watch patrols stomp by, clapping wooden clappers to remind everyone of the ever-present danger of flames. You clutch your robe a little tighter, imagining how easily one stray lantern could ignite the paper-thin walls of the city. Yet down in the cellar of nearly every house, away from fire and smoke, clay pickle jars sit quietly, doing their alchemy. Inside, vegetables soften, acids develop, flavors deepen. If you listen close, you might even hear the faint fizz of fermentation, a microscopic orchestra in the dark. And here's the thing, pickles weren't just food, they were identity. Edo's neighborhoods were known for slightly different flavors. Maybe one district preferred heavier salt, another went crazy with chili peppers, and another leaned toward sweet miso brines. If you grew up in one part of town, you carried that flavor memory with you forever. Even today, Japanese people sometimes argue, half-jokingly, over whose grandma's pickles were the best. Historians still argue whether these regional nuances were deliberate expressions of culture or simply accidents of available ingredients. Either way, your tongue became a map. You keep wandering, lantern glow catching on glossy ceramic jars lined up like silent soldiers. Your feet ache, but the city doesn't sleep yet. Somewhere, a drunkard is laughing too loud, sake on his breath. Somewhere else, a mother hushes her child to sleep with the promise of a pickle-packed rice ball waiting in the morning. Edo lived and breathed in rhythm with its pickles. They weren't glamorous, but they anchored the chaos. So here you are, lost in the salty, sour, funky world of Edo pickles, and the night has only just begun. Your sandals scuff against the uneven cobbles as you drift away from the noisy stalls and into quieter back lanes. Here, under the faint glow of firefly lanterns, you stumble upon a humble sight. Rows of small wooden tubs stacked with salt, turnips buried deep inside, their leafy tops poking out like messy bed hair. The air is heavy with brine, sharp but oddly comforting, as though the whole alley is sighing out preservation. You kneel down and brush the surface, crystals of coarse sea salt catching the dim light. These are the salted roots, the beginning of Edo's pickle story. It seems so simple. Pack a vegetable in salt, wait, and eat. But in this simplicity lies survival. Salt draws out water, curbing bacteria that would otherwise spoil the crop. For commoners in Edo, who might have nothing more luxurious than a bowl of rice and maybe a scrap of fish on rare occasions, salted vegetables gave meals both variety and safety. Historians still argue whether ordinary Edo households salted their vegetables mainly for taste or purely for preservation, but either way, the practice spread so deeply that it became second nature. You salted things not because it was trendy, but because your stomach demanded it. Mainstream history notes that turnips were among the earliest roots to be salted regularly in Japan, far more common than the cucumbers or eggplants that pop up in later centuries. Easy to grow, fast to harvest, and forgiving in poor soil, turnips made the perfect candidate. And when you bite into a salted turnip slice, imagine the crunch, the sharp saline punch. You understand why Edo mouths never got bored of it. It wasn't fancy, but it cut through the blandness of rice like lightning. Now for a quirk, salted vegetables weren't only eaten. Sometimes the leftover brine was reused as a cleaning solution or even as a rudimentary pick-me-up drink for laborers. Imagine slurping down a warm, salty turnip brine after hauling firewood all day, kind of like Edo's version of a sports drink. Though you won't find it in today's vending machines unless someone's playing a cruel prank. The rhythm of the year dictated when these roots were packed away. In late autumn, families hurried to harvest before frost nipped the leaves. The air filled with the scrape of knives, the hiss of salt pouring, and the low murmur of mothers instructing children to tamp the roots firmly. In winter, these barrels became treasure chests. Every slice pulled from the salt bed was a tiny victory over scarcity. Think of it like modern meal prepping, only instead of neat Tupperware boxes, you had heavy wooden tubs in your cellar and no microwave to hurry things along. As you picture this, you step closer to one household where a mother is scraping salt across a fresh batch of daikon, her hands red from the chill. She hums softly, not for performance, but as a rhythm to her work. A child toddles nearby, trying to lick the salt crystal that fell to the floor, and she scolds gently. These little domestic scenes repeated endlessly across Edo. Quiet, ordinary, yet essential. Scholars debate how much of this salting habit was influenced by earlier Chinese preservation methods versus local Japanese ingenuity. Did the practice of heavy salt beds drift across the sea with old trade? Or was it simply the universal human instinct of, we have food, we must not waste it? Either way, Edo carried it forward with obsessive care. Of course, salted roots weren't without their drawbacks. Excess salt wasn't exactly kind to the kidneys, and Edo's doctors sometimes warned against overindulgence. But moderation was rarely an option when alternatives were scarce. Better to risk a salty diet than face the gnawing hunger of winter. People joked that Edoats could live without rice for a day, but not without pickles. Half truth, half exaggeration, like all the best humor. You run a hand across the rough tub edge, imagining how it would feel to plunge your hand into the gritty salt and tug out a softened turnip. The bite would be firm, the flavor startling, and your lips would pucker. Modern tongues might call it too plain, too sharp, but in Edo, it was the flavor of security. Even now, families in rural Japan sometimes bury vegetables in salt the old way, passing down the memory like a whispered recipe. Step back out into the street. Somewhere down the lane, a group of workers laugh around a small brazier, trading stories while gnawing on salted radish sticks. Their laughter floats up with the smoke, a reminder that even the humblest food can bring joy. And you, trailing along, begin to feel that maybe there's a kind of magic in these salty roots. Not glamorous, not luxurious, but quietly indispensable. The morning in Edo begins with the shuffle of sandals, the creak of shutters, and the quiet thrum of a city already awake before the sun has lifted fully. You walk behind a man in layered robes, his hair tied in the stiff top knot of the warrior class. At his hip, the daisho, long and short swords, glint faintly, but your eyes drift downward to the small wooden box he carries. A samurai's bento, not a feast, but a modest packed meal for a long day of patrol, errands, or bureaucratic duties. When he finally sets it down on a bench near the moat, curiosity pulls you closer. He slides the lid aside, and there it is, rice neatly pressed. A pickled plum burning red at its center, and to the side, a few strips of pickled radish. The secret life of samurai lunches is less about swords than it is about pickles. It might surprise you. Popular imagination paints samurai as men of endless banquets, always feasting in castles. The mainstream historical fact, though, is that the average mid-ranking samurai often lived on a modest stipend, barely enough to cover rice for his household, let alone delicacies. Pickles, inexpensive and nourishing, filled the gap. They provided salt, variety, and above all, a sense of ritual. To bite into a sour umeboshi while staring at a bowl of plain rice was to remind yourself that discipline mattered as much at the table as on the battlefield. The box you peek into reveals another detail. The umeboshi's deep crimson stain radiates across the white rice like a tiny sunrise. It wasn't just decoration. The acid of the plum helped keep the rice from spoiling, which mattered when a warrior carried his meal across town. Edo summers were humid, unforgiving, and rice could turn quickly. The umeboshi worked like nature's preservative, making the bento safe long after dawn. Historians still argue whether this trick was discovered by trial and error or whether medical knowledge guided it, but either way, it became tradition. And here comes the quirk. Some warriors believed the umeboshi carried not just preservative power but courage itself. Before battle, or more likely, before a stressful bureaucratic inspection, they might pop a sour plum into their mouth, puckering instantly. The sharp jolt of sourness was said to jolt the spirit awake. Imagine chewing the most eye-watering sour candy, then walking into a meeting. You'd feel alive, if nothing else. In Edo, that briny punch was practically an energy drink. But pickles weren't limited to plums. Tucked beside the rice, slender sticks of takuan, bright yellow daikon, often made an appearance. Their crunch balanced the softness of rice, their tang added brightness to otherwise bland meals. In some tales, a samurai polishing his sword late at night would crunch on a radish pickle to stay awake, the sound echoing through the quiet house. Edo commoners joked that you could tell a samurai's mood by the sound of his chewing. Soft and steady meant calm, loud and aggressive meant trouble. Was it true? Who knows? But it's a vivid image, isn't it? You follow your samurai into a barracks where a cluster of men are already seated, lunchboxes open. The sight is strangely uniform. Rice, pickles, maybe a sliver of dried fish if fortune smiled that week. These men swap gossip about stipends, about sword polishers charging too much, about the latest kabuki scandal, but their chopsticks inevitably return to the pickles. There's comfort in the predictability. Food historians point out that pickles were one of the few guaranteed constants in Edo diets. No matter your rank, something sour and salted sat on your plate. That made them cultural glue, bridging classes even if the ingredients differed. Step outside again. A young page trots along with a lacquered box meant for his master. You glance inside as he passes and notice the difference. Instead of simple radish, this box carries pickled burdock root, cut into fine strips. A bit more refined, maybe even flavored with soy. It's a small signal of status. Wealthier samurai could afford a little variation. Still, at heart, it was all brined vegetables. No escaping it. And here's the debate. Some scholars wonder whether samurai truly relished their pickles or merely tolerated them out of necessity. Diaries mention both affection and boredom. One official scribbled that he longed for a day without salty vegetables, while another praised umeboshi as the steadfast ally of the warrior stomach. Perhaps it was both. Sometimes love, sometimes fatigue, but always present. As you sit by the moat watching dragonflies hover over the water, you realize these lunchboxes reveal more than just food habits. They whisper about discipline, frugality, and the strange democracy of taste. A samurai might be elevated by sword and birth, but in his lunch he knelt beside commoners, munching the same sour crunch that flavored everyone's rice. Edo's pickles, in their humble way, sliced through class barriers. One soldier finishes his meal, tips back the leftover brine, and grimaces with satisfaction. You laugh softly. It's not that different from someone today chugging the last sip of pickle juice from the jar. Some things never change, no matter how many centuries pass. The midday sun leans heavily over Edo, heating the tiled roofs until they shimmer and pressing the smell of grilled fish, soy, and fermenting brine into the air like a permanent perfume. You drift toward the marketplace, where wooden stalls line the wide avenue, and everyone, it seems, is talking at once. The atmosphere buzzes not just with commerce, but with chatter, news, rumors, and the kind of juicy gossip that travels faster than a courier on horseback. And always, hanging in the background, the smell of pickles. Picture rows of barrels, open-topped, showing off their contents like precious jewels, radishes sliced thin, eggplants a deep purple sheen, cucumbers submerged in cloudy brine. Vendors call out, their cries half sales pitch, half performance. One woman, sleeves rolled up, thrusts a bamboo ladle into her vat, lifting out dripping cucumbers with a flourish, while another vendor boasts that his radishes are as crisp as the snap of your mother-in-law's tongue. You laugh under your breath. It's not a bad sales line. A mainstream fact here. Edo was a city of nearly 1 million by the 18th century, one of the largest urban centers on Earth. Feeding that many mouths demanded constant trade, and pickles became a staple of market life. Affordable, durable, and quick to sell, they bridged the gap between farmer and townsman. Almost every market lane had its pickle sellers, and almost every household bought them. It wasn't only about preservation anymore. It was about flavor, convenience, and even fashion. You squeeze into the crowd where women in cotton yukata bargain loudly. One debates whether to pay for an extra jar, the vendor teasing that she's stingier than a dried sardine. The banter is as lively as the commerce. And this is where gossip thrives. While reaching for turnips, customers trade whispers about the new kabuki play, about a neighbor's suspiciously late-night visitors, or about which samurai family fell into debt. Pickle stalls doubled as news kiosks. No parchment, no ink, just juicy rumors brined alongside cucumbers. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some sellers sprinkled unusual seasonings, chili flakes, shiso leaves, even bits of dried persimmon peel, claiming secret recipes handed down for generations. Whether true or just marketing spin, customers bit into these variations and spread the word as though they were tasting rare treasure. Historians still argue whether these creative tweaks were genuine family traditions or simply opportunistic attempts to stand out in a saturated market. Either way, it added color to the pickle landscape. The marketplace was also a place of spectacle. Children darted between stalls, stealing salted radish sticks when vendors weren't looking, earning sharp smacks on the head when caught. Performers with painted faces juggled, danced, or sang silly rhymes about sour plums. Even the pickle sellers themselves sometimes launched into chants, half song, half joke, meant to lodge in your memory. Imagine an Edo version of today's annoying commercial jingle. Daikon so crisp, daikon so clean, bite it once and you'll feel serene. Only, sung by a man balancing on a crate. You step closer to a tall merchant who's showing off pickled eggplants gleaming like polished stones. He boasts loudly that these are fit for the table of a daimyo, though you can tell he's just fishing for a higher price. A passerby chuckles and mutters that if a daimyo actually ate them, the merchant would faint from pride. Jokes like these flew around constantly. Edoats loved poking fun at themselves and their sellers, making the act of buying pickles a communal theater. The debate, though, lies in how much trust people placed in these vendors. Some scholars claim Edo citizens grew wary of dishonest sellers who sometimes watered down brine or used inferior vegetables. Others argue that regular customers forged strong, almost familial ties with their favorite stalls, loyalty running as deep as the pickle barrels themselves. Was the market a den of cheats or a hub of trust? Like most human spaces, probably both. A man brushes past you, carrying a bundle of bamboo leaves tied with twine. He's whistling, and from the smell, you guess he's just bought pickled burdock. Behind him, a group of apprentices argue about who should pay for the pickled plums they've been sampling like free candy. One swears he'll return the favor next week. Another says he'd rather swallow his sword than pay for someone else's snack. Their laughter rolls down the lane, bright and infectious. As the day stretches, the crowd swells, and you realize the market isn't just about goods, it's about connection. People meet, argue, joke, and trade stories as much as they trade coins. The pickle barrels stand at the heart of it all, silent but essential, giving everyone something to taste, to smell, and to talk about. Even when the gossip fades and the stalls pack up, the tang lingers in the air, a reminder that in Edo, food and chatter were inseparable. You drift from the marketplace toward a quieter neighborhood, where the smell of brine gives way to something richer, darker, and more complex. It's the aroma of miso, fermented soybean paste, thick as clay, salty yet earthy, almost nutty. Somewhere nearby, a household has cracked open its miso tub, and you catch the faint, savory tang rising into the air. As you step closer, you notice vegetables half buried in that brown, sticky paste, their green and white edges peeking through like fossils caught in mud. Welcome to the world of misozuke, where vegetables and miso meet in a briny, slow embrace. At first glance, the idea seems strange, covering cucumbers or daikon in a paste meant for soup. But here's the mainstream fact. Miso was one of Edo's most versatile and beloved ingredients. used in soup, marinades, sauces, and even desserts. Miso also found new life as a pickling medium. Vegetables packed into it absorbed the salty, umami-rich flavors, softening in texture and deepening in taste. For families who made their own miso at home, this practice was practical too. No need to buy extra salt when you already had a fermenting tub in the corner. A woman kneels by her kitchen hearth, carefully digging out a daikon from her miso bed. The paste clings thickly, and she wipes it away with practiced hands before slicing the radish thin. The first bite is salty, but then comes a mellow sweetness and the deep, layered taste only miso can lend. You imagine the crunch, the way the flavor lingers at the back of your tongue. It's not delicate. It's bold, earthy, and grounding, like the city itself. Now for the quirk. Misozuke wasn't only about food. Some households believed that burying vegetables in miso transferred not just flavor, but the paste's protective qualities. After all, miso itself was revered as a health-giving food, thought to ward off illness and strengthen the body. So, if you ate a cucumber steeped in miso, surely you were doubling the benefit. Was it scientifically true? Probably not. But in Edo, belief carried weight, and people swore by it. Historians still argue whether this faith was rooted in genuine medicinal observation or simply in cultural symbolism that equated fermentation with vitality. Picture a dinner scene. The family gathers, bowls of rice steaming, miso soup fragrant, and in the center, a plate of miso pickled eggplant. The skin shines dark and glossy, the flesh tender, almost creamy. Chopsticks move quickly, clattering softly against bowls. For a moment, conversation pauses. The miso pickles demand attention. They're not background food, but a centerpiece, a proud showcase of household skill. If the pickles taste good, it reflects on the diligence of the cook, usually the women of the house. A poorly flavored misozuke, too salty or too bland, could spark teasing or even mild embarrassment. Imagine being remembered not for your talents, but for your sad, soggy radish. Nobody wanted that legacy. As you wander further, you hear neighbors swapping advice about how long to leave cucumbers in the paste. One swears by a single night for crispness, another insists on 3 days for depth. It becomes clear, pickle making wasn't just a chore, but a kind of folk science honed by trial, error, and endless family debate. Much like arguing today over whether pineapple belongs on pizza, Edoats argued about the right amount of time for miso pickling. Some debates, it seems, never change. And yet, not all misozuke were humble. In wealthier households, the miso bed might be enriched with sake leaves or even sesame for added nuance. Daimyo families sometimes exchanged jars of luxurious miso-pickled gourds as gifts, the kind of edible present that said, "We have both resources and taste." For them, misozuke wasn't survival, it was status, a mark of refinement hidden inside a simple wooden tub. Still, even at its fanciest, misozuke retained something earthy and intimate. Unlike market pickles sold by the barrel, miso pickles often stayed within the household, touched only by family hands. Eating them felt like a secret bond, a flavor tied to your home alone. When children grew up and moved away, they carried the memory of that taste like an invisible inheritance. Historians still argue whether misozuke developed first as a survival strategy or as a flavor experiment gone lucky. But either way, it became a marker of belonging. You pause by a small garden where miso jars are lined up, lids weighted with stones. Insects buzz lazily in the heat, and a cat stretches in the shade, uninterested in your presence. The jars, squat and unassuming, hum with unseen life. Bacteria, working, flavors merging, vegetables slowly transforming. To Edo eyes, this was ordinary. To yours, it feels a little magical. By the time you wander back toward the street, the taste of misozuke lingers in your imagination. Bold, earthy, and surprisingly complex, it stands as a reminder that Edo cuisine was never about extravagance alone. It was about ingenuity, turning what you already had into something layered and lasting. And for one quiet moment, you catch yourself thinking, maybe burying cucumbers in miso isn't such a strange idea after all. The alley narrows, and your sandals crunch against fine dust as you step toward another house where the air smells nutty, earthy, and faintly sour. At first, you think someone is baking bread, but as you peek through an open gate, you see the real source. A large wooden tub filled with rice bran, nuka, darkened and damp from salt, water, and weeks of use. A woman kneels beside it, sleeves tied back, plunging her hand deep into the mixture and stirring with steady, practiced circles. This is the nuka bed, the living heart of Edo pickling, the place where science and superstition blur. Here's the mainstream fact. The rice bran bed, or nuka doko, was one of the most widespread fermentation techniques in Edo households. Families kept a tub of it like they kept firewood or rice, feeding it with scraps of kelp or chili peppers, adding salt, and most importantly, mixing it daily by hand. Vegetables buried in the bed, cucumbers, eggplants, carrots, emerged days later tangy, complex, and alive with probiotics we'd now call good bacteria. Without refrigeration, this was cutting-edge food science, though Edoats wouldn't have used the term lactic acid fermentation. They just knew it worked. You crouch lower, fascinated by the woman's rhythm. Her fingers churn through the warm, moist bran, and she hums softly, as though coaxing the microbes into cooperation. Children peer over the edge, noses wrinkled at the earthy funk. And then you notice the warmth. It's faint, but undeniable. The bed actually gives off heat. That's the microbial orchestra at work, millions of tiny organisms breaking down starches and sugars, singing an invisible fermentation song. If you lean close enough, you might swear you hear it fizz, like a faint whisper. Now, for a quirky tidbit. Edo. People believed the health of a nuka bed reflected the health of the household. If your pickles soured too harshly or developed a strange odor, neighbors might gossip that your family was unlucky or careless. Conversely, a fragrant, well-balanced nuka bed signaled diligence, prosperity, and even moral character. It was almost like sourdough starters today. Nuka beds lived and died by their keepers, passed down like heirlooms. Some families claimed theirs had been alive for generations, fed and stirred daily by women who treated them like a temperamental pet. Historians still argue whether these beds were truly as ancient as families claimed, or whether the constant refreshing of bran and salt meant they were essentially reborn every few years. But the mythology stuck. To toss away a nuka bed was like breaking a living bond, almost a family shame. You step aside as another neighbor comes by, carrying a bucket of fresh bran from the mill. Bran was a byproduct of polishing rice, and in Edo, where rice was king, bran was plentiful. Turning it into a fermenting medium was as practical as it was ingenious. And just like misozuki, the nuka bed was both survival tool and flavor engine. At mealtime, the results speak for themselves. Imagine lifting a cucumber from its bran cocoon, brushing off the grains, rinsing it lightly, then slicing it thin. The taste is bright, tangy, and alive, a crunch that wakes up your tongue. For Edwats, this was daily fare, not luxury. A bowl of rice, a miso soup, a grilled fish if you were lucky, and a few slices of nukazuki. That was dinner. Humble, nourishing, endlessly repeatable. But of course, Edo humor never let anything stay too solemn. Jokes floated about lazy husbands who claimed they could taste when their wives skipped a day of stirring the nuka bed. Others teased that too much garlic in the bran could sour not just the pickles, but the household mood. And in bathhouses, men compared the tang of their family's nukazuki the way people today might brag about craft beer. You can almost hear them. "Ah, my cucumbers ferment for 3 nights exactly. None of that rushed nonsense." Debates linger, too, among modern scholars. Did Edo households truly grasp the microbial balance at work, or did they simply follow tradition blindly? Some argue that folk wisdom about feeding the bed with scraps showed a rudimentary understanding of fermentation. Others suggest it was all trial and error, rituals repeated without real comprehension. Either way, the results filled Edo bellies, and that was knowledge enough. As the sun lowers, you notice how tenderly the woman pats the surface of the bran after finishing her stirring. She smooths it flat, sprinkles a little salt, and covers the tub with cloth. There's a sense of ceremony in it, as though tucking in a child for the night. The smell lingers, rich and earthy, promising tomorrow's meal. You step back onto the lane, the image burned into your mind, hands buried deep in warm bran, stirring life into an invisible world. Edo may have been a city of warriors and merchants, but its heartbeat, in countless homes, was the quiet rhythm of women tending their nuka beds. The night deepens, lanterns flicker, and your path bends toward a row of apothecary shops. Their shelves gleam with bottles of powdered roots, rolled herbs, and strange concoctions that smell equal parts comforting and alarming. But what really catches your eye isn't the jars of ground deer horn or bundles of ginseng. It's a plain wooden bucket sitting at the shop front. Inside sloshes a cloudy liquid with a salty tang, and the sign dangling above it proclaims boldly, "Stomach soother, pickle brine." Here's the mainstream fact. In Edo, pickles weren't just side dishes. Their brine was often sold and consumed as medicine. Umeboshi, with its fierce acidity, was thought to cure fatigue, aid digestion, and even prevent food poisoning. Doctors of the time recommended pickle juice for everything from stomach aches to hangovers. After a long night of sake, a quick sip of leftover brine was believed to steady the world again. Sound familiar? Modern athletes drink electrolyte fluids. Edowats slugged pickle juice. Different packaging, same desperate hope. You step closer to watch a merchant ladle out a cup of brine for a weary-looking carpenter. The man grimaces, downs it in one gulp, and wipes his mouth with his sleeve. Then he nods, satisfied, as though this murky liquid had worked some kind of instant magic. You can't help but smirk. It's like watching someone down an energy shot today. Bitter, harsh, but weirdly addictive. Here's the quirky tidbit. Pickle brine was sometimes used for remedies far outside digestion. People soaked sore feet in it after long days of walking Edo's endless streets. Others dabbed it on minor cuts, convinced it sped healing. Some even believed it could ward off evil spirits if sprinkled at the doorstep, the sharp odor acting like invisible armor. Historians still argue whether these practices stemmed from observed benefits or pure superstition, but either way, the salty liquid carried an aura of healing. Step inside the apothecary, and you'll find scrolls scribbled with household remedies. For fever, umeboshi boiled in tea. For nausea, cucumber brine mixed with ginger. For courage, daikon brine taken at dawn. That last one makes you chuckle. Was courage really hiding at the bottom of a pickle jar? Maybe. Or maybe it was just an Edward's way of justifying a salty snack before breakfast. One doctor's diary from the period mentions prescribing umeboshi for soldiers traveling the Tokaido Road. The sour fruit, packed with salt, prevented them from growing faint under the sun. Today, we'd call it hydration and electrolytes. Back then, it was simply the plum's strength. You picture weary travelers chewing on wrinkled plums, their faces puckering comically, but their bodies revived enough to trudge on. Not everyone agreed, of course. Some skeptics argued that pickle brine was nothing more than flavored salt water, and relying on it for cures was folly. Scholars debate whether Edo commoners truly believed in its power, or whether they just enjoyed any excuse to sip something sharp and bracing. Still, the tradition persisted, and when whole communities cling to a practice for centuries, it tells you something, not necessarily about science, but about comfort, trust, and ritual. Back outside, the air grows cooler, and you spot a group of young men gathered around a street stall, each holding a small bamboo cup. They toast dramatically, clinking cups as though celebrating, then down their shots of brine in unison. Laughter erupts as one coughs and splutters, face twisted in mock agony. It's less medicine and more bravado now, a game of who can stomach the sour punch without wincing. Think of it as Edo's version of a dare shot at a college party, minus the neon lighting and regrettable karaoke. You wander past another stall where an old woman offers umeboshi wrapped in paper packets. Her pitch is quieter, softer. Good for travel, good for the gut, good for keeping your strength. You watch a mother buy one for her son, tucking it carefully into his sash before he sets out on errands. That tiny crimson fruit becomes a charm, both literal and symbolic, against the unpredictability of the day. As you keep walking, the briny tang seems to cling to your tongue, even though you haven't sipped a drop. The smell hangs in the night air like an invisible thread connecting apothecary stalls, household kitchens, and weary travelers alike. For Edward's, the line between food and medicine blurred easily, and Pickles sat right at that crossroads. Were they truly healing? Historians still argue, but you know this much. They made people feel cared for, and sometimes that's all the cure you need. The further you drift along Edo's streets, the livelier the sounds become. Clattering bowls, shouts of hawkers, and the rhythmic creak of a food cart's wooden wheels. Your nose twitches before your ears can catch up, because what rolls toward you is unmistakable, the sharp, vinegary perfume of street pickles. A vendor pushes his cart slowly, calling out the day's offerings in a sing-song voice, and people gather like moths to a lantern. Here's the mainstream fact. Street vendors selling pickles were a fixture of Edo life. Known as tsukemono-ya, these sellers offered quick bites to busy townsfolk who couldn't afford full meals or simply wanted something crisp and salty between chores. The pickles were cheap, portable, and refreshing, exactly the sort of street food culture that kept Edo buzzing. Think of them as the Edo equivalent of grabbing a pretzel in New York or skewers in Bangkok. Quick, briny, and always within earshot. You stand among the small crowd, watching as the vendor lifts the lid of a barrel, revealing daikon radishes sliced thin and glistening from their salty bath. He spears a few pieces with chopsticks and hands them to a customer wrapped in a paper cone. The crunch is audible even in the noisy street. Another barrel contains cucumber halves steeped in a cool brine, a popular choice in the heat of summer. Watching people bite into them, you can almost feel that instant relief, juicy, cold, and tart. Now for the quirky tidbit. Some vendors in Edo were so famous for their pickles that songs and jokes were written about them. Children teased each other with rhymes about the pickle man's sour face, and certain sellers developed signature cries that could be recognized across neighborhoods. One was said to shout in a pitch so high that dogs howled in chorus, making his arrival impossible to miss. Edo wasn't short on entertainment, even when the headliner was a guy with a barrel of cucumbers. You notice a group of laborers clustered around the cart, still sweaty from hauling timber. They laugh between bites, comparing whose cucumber crunches loudest, as though it's a contest. One man insists loudly that his teeth are sharper because his cucumber echoed louder than the rest, and the group erupts into mock applause. Street pickles weren't just food, they were social glue, turning an ordinary snack into a chance for banter and camaraderie. But there's a practical side, too. Edo summers were brutally humid, and pickles weren't merely tasty. They helped replenish salt lost from sweat. Historians still argue whether people consciously understood the electrolyte effect or simply liked the taste, but the result was the same. Pickles kept workers going. One contemporary writer even noted that a cucumber in brine gives a man another hour of labor. Sure, he might have been exaggerating, but in a city fueled by muscle power, every salty bite mattered. As you step closer, the vendor catches your eye and grins, offering a free sample. You accept, biting into a slice of cucumber. It's crisp, the brine tingling your lips, the coolness spreading like a sigh through your body. For a moment, the crowd noise fades, and you understand why this simple snack had such staying power. It isn't luxurious, but it's grounding, a taste that pulls you firmly into the present. Street stalls also became places where gossip flowed as freely as brine. Housewives exchanged tips on keeping their nuka beds alive. Young apprentices bragged about their bosses, and travelers shared tales from distant provinces. A pickle cart wasn't just sustenance. It was a bulletin board, a stage, a tavern without alcohol. The vendor, like a bartender, heard everything. You wonder how many secrets brined cucumbers carried away, dissolving into their cloudy bath. One elderly man at the cart insists loudly that his ancestors invented a special pickle that could cure hiccups instantly. He explains, between bites, that if you chew slowly while holding your breath, the sourness shocks the body back to normal. People roll their eyes, but some try anyway, their faces contorting with both effort and acidity. It doesn't work, but the laughter it sparks does more healing than the pickle itself. By the time the cart rattles off to its next corner, the lane feels strangely quieter. You realize how much energy a single pickle seller carried with him. Not just the food, but the sound, the smell, the chance for people to pause. You think back to modern food trucks and their cult followings. Maybe Edo's tsukemono were the same, minus the Instagram posts. The night air settles in again, and your steps feel lighter. With a belly tingling from cucumber brine and a mind humming with the laughter of strangers, you realize the city's heartbeat isn't just in its castles or theaters. It's in the humble barrels of pickles wheeled through its streets. You wander away from the bustle of the pickle cart and find yourself drawn toward a quieter street, lined with homes that look ordinary from the outside, but smell anything but. The air here carries a rich, almost meaty perfume, even though you know no meat is cooking. Something darker, deeper, almost intoxicating. You peek through a half-open door and spot rows of earthenware jars, their lids tied down with rope and cloth. A woman lifts one carefully, scooping out a thick paste, the color of autumn leaves. She presses it around chunks of eggplant, nestling them like treasure into a fragrant bed of fermented soybean paste. Miso. Here's the mainstream fact. Misozuke, or vegetables pickled in miso, was a beloved Edo tradition. The process was simple yet transformative. Burying vegetables in salty miso paste gave them a savory punch that regular brine couldn't match. Eggplant, cucumber, daikon, even garlic all found new lives when sealed in miso. The result wasn't just preservation, but a layering of flavors, the vegetable absorbing umami from the soybeans, while the miso picked up brightness in return. In an age without refrigerators, misozuke offered both longevity and indulgence. The woman hums as she works, gently smoothing the paste over her vegetables. Each jar smells different, depending on what was used last. Some carry a garlicky sting, others a mellow sweetness, all woven together by the miso's deep bass note. You watch her hands move with care, like she's tucking someone in for a nap, and you realize this is more than food prep. It's craft, ritual, and intuition. Now for a quirky tidbit, some Edoites believed misozuke could ward off colds if eaten at the right time of year. Families gave miso-pickled garlic cloves to children during winter, hoping to keep sickness at bay. Other households kept secret blends, mixing miso with sake lees, mustard, or even powdered green tea to create family recipes with supposed medicinal power. Imagine kids groaning at the dinner table as their mothers insisted, "Eat your garlic miso pickles. It'll keep you strong." Edo childhood wasn't always candy and fireworks. Sometimes it was a pungent clove pulled from a jar. Historians still argue whether the medicinal claims of misozuki had real basis or were simply convenient folklore layered over daily habits. What's undeniable is how the practice blurred lines between flavor and health, indulgence and necessity. In some households, jars of misozuke stood alongside herbal remedies, treated with equal reverence. The jars themselves were part of the culture. Thick clay vessels held the paste, breathing slightly through their porous walls, fostering slow, steady fermentation. Some were small, tucked in a kitchen corner. Others were massive, practically family heirlooms passed from mother to daughter. You picture them stacked like guardians in a storeroom, their contents slowly transforming hidden alchemy at work. As you stand there, the woman offers you a slice of miso-pickled cucumber. You bite in and taste something unlike the street pickles earlier. The crunch is still there, but the flavor is heavier, layered, salty, savory, with a hint of sweetness at the edges. It fills your mouth, clings to your tongue, and lingers long after you swallow. It feels less like a snack and more like a meal's punctuation mark, commanding attention. In the marketplace, misozuke fetched higher prices than simple salt pickles. Merchants and samurai households prized the complexity, often serving them to guests as a mark of refinement. To be offered miso-pickled vegetables was to be honored, even flattered. The pickle, in this case, wasn't just food, it was status, proof that your household had the patience, ingredients, and taste to create something layered. Yet the same miso jars could belong to humble families too, who scraped together the paste after months of brewing soybeans and barley. For them, misozuke was less luxury, more clever resourcefulness. The miso preserved their vegetables, and the vegetables stretched their miso further. It was a perfect loop, practical and flavorful. One Edo diary mentions that travelers often carried misozuke wrapped in leaves, the salty paste keeping vegetables edible on long journeys. Soldiers, too, valued the jars for sustenance in camps. Even on the road, the taste of home followed, carried inside a smear of paste. You can imagine, though, the occasional misfire. A careless household might forget to check their jars, and when they finally opened them, they'd discover vegetables over-fermented into mush, their odor less umami and more weaponized. Neighbors joked about miso monsters lurking in cellars, jars that no one dared open. You half wonder if some Edo horror tales had their origins in a badly neglected misozuke pot. By the time you step away, the smell of miso lingers, clinging to your sleeves, rich and enveloping. The woman closes her jars with a satisfied nod, as though she sealed not just food, but time itself. You realize these jars are like quiet clocks, measuring patience in weeks, not minutes, teaching Edo households the art of waiting. And as you return to the street, you carry that lesson with you, a reminder that even the simplest pickle could be a masterpiece of patience and flavor. The streets shift again as you wander deeper into Edo, and soon the quiet clink of bells and the scent of steaming sake rise around you. Ahead, a brewery bustles, its great wooden vats exhaling a warm, yeasty fog into the night. Workers haul sacks of rice, their sleeves rolled high, while others stir great paddles through frothy liquid that hisses and bubbles like some mythical swamp. It's intoxicating in more ways than one, and you realize you've stumbled into the world of sake. Though the part that interests you tonight isn't in the cup, but in the dregs. Here's the mainstream fact. The byproduct of brewing sake, called sake lees or kasu, became the foundation for a beloved form of pickling in Edo. Instead of discarding this creamy, fragrant mash of rice solids and yeast, households used it to bury vegetables, creating kasuzuke. The lees imparted a subtle sweetness, a mellow aroma, and a faint buzz of alcohol that transformed everything from carrots to fish. Edo was a city of recycling before the word existed. Nothing went to waste when ingenuity could find a use. You linger at the edge of the brewery yard as a man scoops pale kasu into buckets. He sells it not as waste, but as treasure, and buyers rush forward eagerly. Housewives clutch their coins tightly, knowing this mash will become tomorrow's pickles, perhaps even a guest offering. Children peer curiously into the buckets, wrinkling their noses at the faint smell of booze, while one bold boy jokes that eating kasuzuke will make him drunk like father. The laughter that follows is loud enough to echo down the alley. Now, for a quirky tidbit, some Edoats believed kasuzuke carried hidden energy. Fishermen swore that a slice of kasu-pickled daikon kept them warmer at sea, the trace alcohol sparking heat in their bellies. Others used kasu itself as a skin treatment, smearing it on their faces for smoothness. You imagine an Edo beauty secret whispered between women. If you want soft cheeks, rub on sake dregs. Meanwhile, their husbands probably just enjoyed the excuse to smell like a brewery. Historians still argue whether kasuzuki was primarily a practical preservation method or a deliberate flavor pursuit. After all, kasu wasn't always cheap. Sake breweries could charge good money for it. Some scholars say wealthy households prized kasuzuki for its refined sweetness, while others insist it was simply thriftiness that drove commoners to adopt it. Both could be true, and like most things in Edo, class and taste intertwined in curious ways. You watch as a household nearby unseals a crock of kasuzuki. The air shifts instantly, rich with sweet fermentation and a faint alcoholic tang. Inside lie cucumbers, their skins stained pale from the mash, and a few slivers of carrot glowing like jewels. The family gathers eagerly, brushing off the clinging kasu and slicing the vegetables thin. You're offered a piece, crisp, mellow, with a faint warmth that tickles your throat like a ghost of sake itself. Not intoxicating, but certainly mood-lifting. Kasu had other unexpected roles, too. In lean seasons, some families even mixed it into soups for nutrition, stretching the last ounce of sustenance from the brewing process. Children sometimes slurped bowls of kasu broth, half sour, half sweet, their bellies filled with something that had once been destined for waste. Edo resourcefulness had no shame in scraping the bottom of the vat. There were risks, of course. Leave vegetables in kasu too long, and the pickles grew overpoweringly pungent, sharp enough to make neighbors plug their noses. Jokes circulated about explosive crocks that had been forgotten in storerooms, lids rattling mysteriously in the night. One tale even claimed a runaway thief had been caught when the scent of rotten kasuzuki leaked from the bag he carried. True or not, the story was retold with relish in bathhouses, always earning a round of chuckles. Kasuzuki also carried symbolic weight. In some samurai households, serving kasu pickled fish was considered a gesture of refinement, an acknowledgement that their status allowed them to enjoy subtler, sweeter tastes beyond the salty fare of the masses. For commoners, though, kasuzuki represented something else: the cleverness of stretching resources, of finding luxury in leftovers. That paradox made kasuzuki both humble and elite. A food that blurred the social lines just enough to make everyone curious about what the other side's pickles tasted like. As the brewery shutters close for the night, the smell of warm rice and alcohol clings to the air like a blanket. You continue walking, belly warmed by the memory of kasuzuki, amused at the thought that Edo households smeared their vegetables in what modern people might call boozy skincare paste. Pickling in miso gave vegetables richness, but kasu gave them laughter, the kind of flavor that nudges the cheeks into a smile. Your sandals scuff against the stones as the sounds of the brewery fade, replaced by the faint jangle of bells and the earthy perfume of drying herbs. Ahead, you spot a tiny workshop glowing in the dusk. Bundles of mustard greens hang from rafters, their leaves shriveled but still pungent, while jars line the shelves in neat military rows. A man inside sneezes dramatically, then laughs at himself, wiping his nose on his sleeve before plunging a hand into a vat of golden paste. This, you realize, is no ordinary pickling station. You've stumbled into the sharp, nose-tingling world of karashizuke mustard pickles. Here's the mainstream fact. Mustard was a favored seasoning in Edo, and it found its way into pickling just as naturally as it did into sauces and dips. Karashizuki involved pressing vegetables, often daikon, cucumbers, or eggplants, into a mixture spiked with mustard seeds or prepared paste. The result was fiery, sinus-clearing pickles that cut through bland rice with startling clarity. Edo households treasured this spice not only for flavor, but also for its supposed cleansing qualities. After a heavy meal, a bite of mustard pickle was thought to sweep the mouth clean. You edge closer to watch the pickle maker at work. He smears a daikon slice generously with yellow paste, then nestles it into a wooden tub. The aroma wafts up, and your nostrils twitch in protest. The sharpness is almost visible, as though mustard is a spirit that leaps from the tub to poke your sinuses directly. Children outside dare each other to take a bite, shrieking when one finally does and flaps his hands wildly, eyes watering. Laughter erupts, the kind only a mischievous snack can spark. Now for the quirky tidbit. Ed Watts believed mustard had the power to ward off colds and evil spirits alike. Some households hung bundles of mustard greens by the door to keep sickness away, while others smeared mustard paste on wooden charms for good fortune. It wasn't unusual to hear claims that a daikon with mustard saves you from the doctor. Imagine it. A society where your immune system rests on a particularly spicy pickle. Not a bad gamble, though you might still prefer a blanket and tea. Historians still argue whether mustard pickles were a luxury of the upper classes or a common household staple. Some evidence suggests that mustard seeds, imported through trade routes, were pricey and limited. Others argue that Edo's booming merchant culture made mustard more widely available, letting both samurai and shopkeepers enjoy its fiery charms. The truth, as always, is probably tangled somewhere in between, spicy enough to keep debate simmering. The workshop owner, noticing your interest, offers you a slice of cucumber slathered in mustard brine. You hesitate, but curiosity wins. The bite is immediate fire, rushing through your nose, making your eyes sting. Yet beneath the heat lies something addictive. The cucumber's coolness, the brine's salt, the mustard's kick. It's like edible fireworks, a sudden spark that fades quickly but leaves you wanting another bite. You cough, laugh at yourself, and the pickle maker grins knowingly. Mustard pickles carried social weight too. Serving them at a gathering was a sign of sophistication, a little culinary drama to enliven otherwise plain meals. Samurai households sometimes set out small plates of karashizuke to show their refinement, while merchants flaunted them as proof they could afford imported luxuries. At the same time, poorer families stretched mustard sparingly, mixing a dab into larger batches of brine to simulate the fiery punch. Creativity, after all, was the lifeblood of Edo cooking. There were mishaps, of course. Stories circulated of overzealous pickle makers who added too much mustard, producing vegetables so fiery they brought tears to anyone within sniffing distance. One humorous tale describes a samurai who challenged his retainers to eat slices without flinching, only to end up sneezing so violently his wig slipped askew. The retainers never let him live it down. Even centuries later, mustard pickles remain the prankster's delight. As you leave the workshop, the smell clings stubbornly to your clothes. a sharp reminder of mustard's power. The air outside feels almost cleaner, as though your sinuses have been scrubbed by invisible brushes. You chuckle at the thought that Edwats might have welcomed the sting as part of their nightly ritual, a way to reset body and spirit before moving on. Walking away, you think of the spectrum you've seen so far, the mellow sweetness of Kasuzuki, the earthy tang of Nukazuki, the fiery blast of Karashizuki. Edo's pickles weren't monotone. They were a palette of moods, each one designed to punctuate life differently. Tonight, mustard taught you that food can sting and soothe in the same breath, a paradox you can still taste on your tongue. The lanes grow quieter now, the festival sounds and brewery clamor fading into a softer hum. You find yourself near a row of shops where faint sweetness lingers in the air, a smell unlike the sharp brines or fiery mustards you've just encountered. Here, the fragrance is mellow, almost cake-like, with hints of toasted rice and old sake. A pair of apprentices haul wooden tubs across the street, their lids sealed tightly, and as one slips, a pale paste oozes from the crack and perfumes the night. The neighbors chuckle knowingly. You've entered the territory of sakekasu pickling, a world where sweetness and preservation intertwine. Here's the mainstream fact. Sakekasu, the pressed lees left after brewing sake, was widely used in Edo as a pickling medium. While kasuzuke often featured vegetables buried in straight lees, sakekasu pickling went a step further. Families sometimes mixed it with mirin or sugar to create a sweeter, milder environment. Daikon, carrots, eggplants, even chunks of fish or tofu soaked in this mash, softening into delicacies prized for their gentle flavor. The process gave Edo cuisine one of its most elegant pickle categories, balancing preservation with an almost confectionery grace. Inside one of the shops, you spot a merchant unsealing a crock. He lifts out a carrot slice stained a faint ivory and holds it to the light. The pickle bends slightly but holds firm, releasing a fragrance both fruity and boozy. He offers it to a waiting customer who chews thoughtfully, nods, and declares it the taste of winter evenings. It's easy to see why. In cold months, sakekasu pickles provided warmth of flavor, a sweet fullness that comforted body and spirit alike. Now for the quirky tidbit. Some Edwats claimed sakekasu pickles could calm troubled dreams. Mothers gave children a slice of kasu pickled radish before bed, insisting the sweet tang would keep nightmares away. Whether the belief stemmed from alcohol traces or sheer parental creativity, children likely accepted, or at least tolerated, the bedtime snack. Historians still argue whether such claims reflected genuine belief in medicinal value, or simply a cultural way to persuade kids into eating pickles. Either way, the tradition clung stubbornly in family tales. You lean closer as another tub is opened, this time revealing slices of fish buried in the pale mash. The smell is stronger, layered with ocean and fermentation. Edwats weren't shy about experimenting. If a vegetable could be improved in kasu, why not fish? The result, known as kasuzuke zakana, carried both preservation and flavor, sustaining families who lived far from the coast. In fact, some scholars suggest kasu pickling helped widen Edo's palate, bringing the sea further inland, one creamy jar at a time. Of course, not every attempt worked perfectly. A careless mix of kasu could leave pickles overly pungent, their sweetness collapsing into cloying heaviness. Edo humorists wrote satirical poems about pickles drunk on their own sake. comparing poorly made kasuzuki to clumsy revelers stumbling home. One verse described a radish so intoxicated it rolled off the table by itself. Food and laughter walked hand in hand in Edo kitchens. You imagine a winter gathering, a household seated around a low brazier, rice steaming, miso soup fragrant, and a small plate of sakekasu pickles placed in the center. Each bite delivers a comforting sweetness that pairs with hot tea or warmed sake. Conversation flows easily, and the pickles serve as punctuation, little pauses that remind everyone to savor. Unlike mustard's fiery slap or nuka's earthy funk, sakekasu whisper rather than shout, offering gentleness in a city that rarely slowed down. As you walk back outside, a neighbor explains that some families reused their kasu for months, refreshing it with sugar or sake until it grew too tired. Others swore by only using fresh lees, insisting the flavor was brighter. Scholars today still debate whether repeated reuse dulled the benefits or deepened the complexity. But for Ed Watts, the decision was less about science and more about preference, pride, and what coins their purse could spare. The scent clings as you continue on, soft, mellow, lingering like an old lullaby. Your mind drifts toward the thought that Edo wasn't merely a city of clashing flavors, but of layered contrasts, sour and sweet, fiery and soothing, practical and whimsical. Tonight, Sakekasu has taught you that even what begins as residue can transform into comfort, a quiet sweetness humming under the noisy rhythm of Edo life. The streets twist again, and now the night air brims with sharper scents. You move toward a narrow lane where barrels line the storefronts, their insides tinted a faint orange-brown. The smell here is savory, nutty, and a touch tangy, a smell that makes you think of simmered soy sauce, roasted beans, and something ancient. You've arrived at the neighborhood devoted to Misozuki pickles, those carefully buried treasures that live within fermented soybean paste. Unlike the soft sweetness of sakekasu, these pickles lean hardy and robust, pulling you firmly into the world of umami. The mainstream fact is clear. Miso itself had long been a staple in Japan, treasured as both seasoning and sustenance. In the Edo period, households recognized miso as a preserving powerhouse, perfect not only for soup, but also for turning vegetables, tofu, and even meats into long-lasting delicacies. Daikon, cucumber, burdock root, and eggplant often disappeared beneath the thick brown paste, sometimes left for days, sometimes for months. When unearthed, they emerged stained, transformed, carrying with them the deep savoriness of the miso, almost as if they had absorbed the spirit of the beans themselves. A merchant waves you closer and proudly cracks open a cask. Out comes a cucumber slice, its green skin now subdued, dulled by its time in the paste. He dusts it lightly and presses it into your hand. The flavor, when you bite, is layered, salty, earthy, faintly sweet, with echoes of koji's fermentation weaving complexity. It's no wonder Ed Watts prized these for both everyday meals and celebratory feasts. The pickle doesn't just preserve, it tells you a story of patience. Now here's the quirky tidbit. Some Edo households actually hid valuables, rings, hairpins, little charms, inside miso crocks to protect them from thieves. Supposedly, few burglars wanted to rummage through stinking bean paste in search of trinkets. Stories claim miso barrels became stealth safes, with pickles guarding secrets as quietly as they absorbed flavor. Historians still argue whether this practice was widespread reality or more of a humorous legend that exaggerated miso's presence in every corner of the Edo home. But the idea of pickles as guardians has its own peculiar charm. You move deeper into the lane, and here miso varieties multiply. Red miso for its boldness, white miso for its milder sweetness, and even regional blends carted into Edo by merchants eager to spread their hometown flavors. A pickler explains that timing is everything. Leave radish in red miso too long, and it turns almost inedibly salty, good only for warriors or laborers craving stamina. White miso, on the other hand, makes delicate pickles that women and children were said to favor. Of course, these claims reveal more about Edo social imagination than about actual taste preferences, but they hint at how food carried symbolic roles. The scholarly debate continues over whether misozuke was primarily about nutrition or flavor indulgence. On one hand, miso imparted protein and minerals, making pickled vegetables more nourishing. On the other, many Edoats treated misozuke as a luxury, not a necessity. Some modern historians suggest that its prominence reflected status. The ability to afford ample miso for burying produce showed economic comfort. Others counter that its prevalence was simply practical, since miso was already central to every kitchen. As you chew another slice, you can't help but think, maybe it was both. And maybe Edoats didn't overanalyze their dinner plates the way scholars do centuries later. Nearby, a playful scene unfolds. Children dare each other to sniff the strongest miso tub. One wrinkles his nose, laughing. Smells like the old man's socks after fishing. His mother swats him gently, but even she chuckles. Humor always lingers where fermentation is involved, and in a society where pickles were eaten daily, little jokes softened the salt. You picture a late-night gathering again, but this time the mood differs from sakakasu warmth. Around the brazier, a group of workers ladle hot miso soup, then reach for slices of misozuke daikon. The pairing is circular. The soup and the pickle mirror each other, each amplifying the earthy undertone. A laborer slaps his knee and says, "This is the taste of strength." Another replies, "Strength and breath that scares the dogs." The table bursts into laughter. What you realize, standing in this lane, is that misozuke represented Edo's seriousness. It was the pickle that carried weight, one that could sustain through long winters, one that tied tightly into the centrality of miso itself. Unlike the playful mustard zouk or the soft kasu, miso pickling grounded families, rooted them in a cycle of fermentation as old as the city's walls. The merchant seals the barrel again, wiping his hands on his apron. He winks, saying that some Edoats swore miso-pickled tofu improved singing voices. Whether true or not, he shrugs. Maybe the confidence comes from chewing something so bold. And perhaps he's right. You can't eat misozuke timidly. You chew it with commitment, like you're in on a centuries-old secret. You step back into the night, the taste still resonant, heavy yet oddly reassuring. Edo, it seems, wasn't only about fireworks of flavor, but about anchors, about foods that reminded people of stability amid chaos. In misozuki, you find that anchor, the pickle, that hums with endurance, that smells of both survival and indulgence. The lanterns grow dimmer as you wind toward another district, and here the scent that greets you is unlike any before. It is darker, heavier, almost earthy in its depth, a smell that suggests caves and long cellars. The air hums with the fragrance of miso again, but now laced with a sharper edge of aging. This is the territory of hacho misozuke. Unlike ordinary miso pickling, this variation drew from hacho miso, the dense, almost black paste made of soybeans aged for years under immense pressure. It was miso that didn't whisper or even talk politely. It thundered in the background of any dish it touched. The mainstream fact sits clearly here. Hacho miso, born in Mikawa province but widely transported into Edo, became a symbol of strength and stamina. It was reputedly eaten by samurai, laborers, and monks for its dense umami, and when used for pickling, it imparted an intensity unlike any other. Radishes, eggplants, cucumbers, even slivers of burdock root were pressed into the thick, tar-like paste, often left for weeks or months. The result was a pickle that wasn't shy about declaring itself. The taste was salty, robust, sometimes even bitter, but it lingered in a way that people came to crave. You peek into a shop where a craftsman is hauling a lid off a massive cask. Inside lies a daikon, its once white skin now nearly mahogany, stained deep by its time in the hacho miso. He slices it thin and offers it with a proud grin. The flavor slaps the tongue, ferocious salt, smoky undertones, and that complex, almost chocolate-like depth that comes only from years of miso aging. You find yourself chewing slowly, because this isn't a pickle to be rushed. It's one that demands you wrestle with its weight. Now for the quirky tidbit. Some Edo jokes compared hacho misozuke to stern school teachers. One bite, and you behave better, quipped a satirist, poking fun at how the pickle's intensity could silence rowdy children. Mothers supposedly used a slice as a disciplinary tool, not as punishment, but as a way to quiet bickering. Whether true or exaggerated, the notion of a pickle doubling as a scolding presence is hard not to laugh at. Historians still argue whether families genuinely used food in this way, or whether it was simply a comic exaggeration that stuck in the city's storytelling. You wander further and overhear merchants explaining the prestige attached to hacho misozuke. Because the base miso took years to prepare, pickles made with it carried an air of luxury. Eating them wasn't just about flavor, it was about showing you could afford patience. Edo's middle classes often splurged on hacho pickles during festivals, weddings, or New Year's, treating them like edible symbols of prosperity. The scholarly debate lingers. Were hacho pickles truly elite foods, or were they widely accessible thanks to Edo's bustling trade routes? Some researchers argue their popularity cut across classes, while others insist their rarity elevated them above everyday fare. Picture a winter night feast. A lacquer tray is set on a tatami mat, holding rice, grilled fish, miso soup, and in the corner, a small plate of hacho misozuke daikon slices. Guests lift them with chopsticks, savoring their strong flavor as a contrast to the mild rice. Conversation slows for a moment, because everyone needs time to chew, to process, to adjust to the storm in their mouths. Then laughter erupts again, jokes about whose tongue has been conquered by the miso giant. Your feet shuffle, and you find another shopkeeper showing off a more experimental side of hacho misozuki. Tofu blocks buried for months until their edges soften and their flavor concentrates. He claims monks used to eat this version during austere retreats, calling it a silent companion. The taste is sharp but grounding, like the culinary equivalent of meditation bells. Some Edoites, however, simply called it too much. preferring the lighter kasu or nuka styles, but others swore by it, saying it gave strength during long labor shifts or winter illnesses. As you move back into the street, children pass by munching on sweet dumplings. They glance at your pickle slice and wrinkle their noses, whispering, "Only grown-ups like that." And perhaps that was the truth. Hacho misozuke wasn't meant to charm. It was meant to challenge, to remind its eater of endurance, patience, and the long wait of fermentation. The night breeze cools your cheeks, and you realize Hacho pickles embody something more than food. They carry Edo's seriousness about balance, pleasure and austerity, sweetness and severity. Where Sakekasu lulled you with comfort and Misozuki grounded you with strength, Hacho Misozuki demanded respect. It wasn't a background flavor. It was the headline act, the booming drum in Edo's pickle orchestra. You step away slowly, still tasting the storm, still half expecting your tongue to bow politely to the memory of miso that refused to be ignored. The streets bend once again, and now the fragrance changes into something sharper, tinged with the scent of soy sauce barrels aging quietly in the dark. You hear the slow drip of liquid as workers ladle thick, inky shoyu from massive cedar casks into smaller containers. The smell is rich, salty, and caramel-like, and it clings to your nose the way steam clings to a kettle lid. In Edo, soy sauce was more than a seasoning. It was practically the city's bloodstream, flowing into kitchens, street stalls, and banquets alike. And when it came to pickling, Shoyu-zuke delivered an unmistakable punch of umami. The mainstream fact here is simple. Shoyu-zuke referred to vegetables or fish steeped directly in soy sauce or a soy-based marinade. Cucumbers, eggplants, garlic, even burdock root were bathed in the dark liquid until their flesh absorbed both salt and depth. The result was a pickle that was simultaneously crisp and savory, a true Edo favorite. Soy sauce was already booming in the 17th and 18th centuries, with towns like Noda and Choshi producing barrels that flooded the capital's markets. Shoyu-zuke was one of the natural outcomes of this abundance, ensuring no household missed out on the chance to transform ordinary vegetables into savory treasures. The shopkeeper in front of you cracks open a jar, pulling out a piece of eggplant that glistens like lacquer. He slices it carefully and offers it forward. The taste bursts with bold saltiness, balanced by faint sweetness from the soy sauce brewing process. Unlike the mellow kasu or the dense hacho miso, shoyu-zuke pickles are fast, assertive, and unapologetic. They don't linger in the ground for months. They sprint to your tongue in a matter of days. Now for the quirky tidbit. Edwats used soy sauce pickles as makeshift currency in playful bets. Gamblers sometimes settled small wagers by handing over a jar of shoyu-zuke cucumbers instead of coins. One humorous record tells of a man who lost so frequently he owed 3 households nothing but pickles for an entire summer. Whether apocryphal or not, the story hints at how integrated pickles were into daily exchanges. Historians still argue whether this practice had any true economic weight, or if it was just a colorful tale amplified by storytellers who loved linking food to mischief. As you stroll deeper, you notice soy sauce merchants boasting proudly about their regional differences. Some claimed their Noda shoyu created superior pickles, smoother and less harsh. Others argued that Choshi's lighter soy gave a cleaner finish. Picklers debated endlessly, as though they were wine connoisseurs. A modern scholar might frame it as a regional branding battle, while Edwats probably just enjoyed the excuse to taste test and complain. Picture a dinner scene. A merchant's family gathers around bowls of steaming rice. At the center, a small dish of shoyu-zuke cucumbers sparkles in the lamplight. The children reach first, snapping the slices between their teeth with satisfying crunches. The parents laugh, teasing that soy sauce pickles vanish faster than rice itself. The rhythm is universal. Salty pickle, sweet rice, salty pickle, sweet rice. The balance creates a kind of edible seesaw, one that keeps meals lively and grounded. A scholarly debate lingers about whether shoyu-zuke was considered common food or festival luxury. Some argue its widespread availability meant it belonged to everyday meals. Others suggest that the best soy sauce pickles, made from high-quality barrels, were displayed proudly during feasts. Perhaps, like many Edo traditions, the truth slid along a spectrum. Cheap soy pickles for daily lunches, premium ones for celebratory trays. The scholars may still argue, but Edoites probably just ate whatever they could afford without worrying about labels. You overhear a street vendor promoting garlic shoyu-zuke said to make men strong and women laugh. The customers chuckle, some covering their noses in mock protest. The garlic's bold aroma mixed with soy sauce, indeed, carried quite a punch. Edwats weren't afraid of robust flavors, and garlic pickles became the kind of thing you ate when you didn't care about social distance. Better to have friends who share your jar, joked one woodblock cartoonist. Another layer emerges as you notice jars labeled with additions like chili peppers or mirin. Shoyu pickling wasn't static. It adapted constantly. Families tweaked recipes depending on preference, budget, or sheer whim. Some added ginger for warmth, others a splash of sake for roundness. The principle was the same: soy sauce as foundation, imagination as garnish. As you step back, you realize that shoyu-zuke reflects Edo itself: fast, bold, a little chaotic, and endlessly adaptable. It wasn't about the meditative patience of hacho miso or the soft sweetness of kasu. It was about grabbing life, bottling it, and dunking it in the one ingredient Edo had in overflowing supply. The night air carries the faint tang of soy down the alley as you walk on, lips still tingling with salt. Edo's pickle orchestra has gained another note, brassy, loud, and impossible to ignore. The alley narrows until you find yourself in a quieter pocket of Edo, where the smell shifts once more. This time, it's sharper, tingling your nose with peppery heat, followed by a sour tang that makes your mouth water. A row of stalls glows under paper lanterns, each advertising karashizuke, pickles steeped in mustard pastes. The barrels here aren't filled with mellow sweetness or deep umami. They hold a firecracker spirit, quick to wake the senses and unapologetically bold. The mainstream fact here is this: karashizuke relied on a paste made from ground mustard seeds, often blended with sake, miso, or even honey, depending on the household recipe. Vegetables like daikon, eggplant, cucumber, or turnip were packed into the fiery mixture. The fermentation wasn't necessarily long. Instead, the mustard delivered an immediate punch that made karashizuke both a condiment and a challenge. In Edo, these pickles were celebrated for their ability to cut through rich foods and refresh the palate after oily or heavy dishes. A merchant grins at you from behind his stall, lifting a lid and offering a sliver of daikon coated in pale yellow mustard. You nibble carefully, and suddenly your nose flares, your eyes water slightly, and you feel the burn race up through your sinuses. It's intense, but strangely invigorating. The vendor chuckles, clearly used to newcomers being startled. "That's the Edo wake-up call," he says. And he isn't wrong. If the city's noisy streets failed to rouse you, one bite of karashizuki certainly would. Here's the quirky tidbit. Edo pranksters supposedly smeared mustard paste on door handles during festival nights. Unsuspecting neighbors would grab the latch, then accidentally rub their eyes, leading to yelps and laughter echoing down the street. While it sounds mischievous, some records do mention karashi being used in playful tricks, much like wasabi in sushi pranks. Historians still argue whether these tales reflect widespread customs or just urban legends that painted Edo citizens as cheekier than they really were. But the image of mustard doubling as a tool for slapstick comedy is too amusing to dismiss. You linger by another barrel where cucumbers glisten beneath the mustard layer. The vendor insists this style of pickle sharpened the senses, and some Edoites even treated karashizuke as a mild medicine. They claimed the mustard's heat could chase away colds or aid digestion after indulgent meals. Modern scholars debate whether these claims were rooted in actual medicinal knowledge or simply folk belief amplified by cultural love for bold flavors. Either way, Edo families reached for mustard pickles as both food and remedy, proving again how blurred the line was between eating and healing. Picture a lively evening tavern. Laborers crowd around low tables, sake cups clinking, tempura sizzling on trays. In the middle sits a dish of karashizuki turnips, pale white slices stained with streaks of yellow. A drunk patron grabs one, bites too eagerly, and coughs violently, causing the whole room to roar with laughter. His friend pats his back and quips, "Don't worry, it only hurts the first 100 times." The tavern keeper grins knowingly, refilling cups. Karashizuke wasn't just food, it was entertainment, fueling stories, jokes, and camaraderie. The scholarly debates swirl too. Was karashizuke a poor man's pickle or a luxury bite? Mustard seeds weren't native to Japan, and although by the Edo period they were cultivated and relatively common, fine blends required skill and imported knowledge. Some historians argue mustard pickles remained more expensive than, say, nukazuke, placing them slightly above daily fare. Others counter that mustard became so ubiquitous in Edo that karashizuke belonged to every class, a democratic jolt of fire shared across wooden tables. The lack of consensus highlights how food status often depends on who's telling the story centuries later. Children dart past carrying festival lanterns, their cheeks pink from excitement. One pauses to point at your mustard-smeared pickle and whispers, "That one bites back." His friend nods solemnly, as if discussing a monster. In a way, the child isn't wrong. Karashizuke had personality, a kind of rebellious streak compared to the city's other, more reserved pickles. Where misozuke carried patience and kasuzuke offered comfort, mustard pickles shouted with mischief and demanded attention. The night air grows cooler, but your lips still tingle from the heat. You can imagine how Edoites leaned on these pickles during winter feasts, letting the spice warm their bellies and cut through monotony. You can also picture summer evenings where a chilled cucumber from a mustard jar offered not just refreshment but a playful slap awake. In either season, Karashizuke was less about quiet sustenance and more about drama, an edible spark. As you step away, you realize you've encountered another layer of Edo's diverse pickle orchestra. Some instruments whisper, others hum, but Karashizuke? It crashes cymbals right in your face, laughing as you blink away the sting. The streets widen again, and this time the air carries a scent that is unmistakably salty and slightly oceanic. You follow it to a stall where bundles of vegetables are stacked high, not buried in miso or mustard, but instead submerged in simple brine. The barrels here slosh softly when nudged, water and salt combining into the most elemental of preserving liquids. This is shiozuke, salt pickling, the foundation upon which almost every other Edo pickle was built. Compared to the ornate costumes of misozuke or karashizuke, this one wears plain robes, yet its simplicity masks a remarkable versatility. The mainstream fact here is that shiozuke was the most common, most widespread form of pickling in Edo. Every household could manage it. All that was required was fresh vegetables, a jar or barrel, clean water, and salt. Daikon, eggplant, cucumber, napa, cabbage. Nearly anything edible could be salted and left to ferment briefly, sometimes only overnight, sometimes for a week or two. The result was a crisp, tangy bite that accompanied rice bowls, bento lunches, or midnight snacks. Because salt was plentiful in Edo, thanks to coastal trade and salt pans, shiozuke became the democratic pickle, cheap, fast, and accessible. A vendor near you scoops out slices of cucumber, pale green and dripping brine. He hands one over with a grin. The taste is bright, clean, almost refreshing, with just enough salt to wake the tongue without overwhelming it. Unlike the mustard fire or miso heaviness, shiozuke speaks quietly, but it speaks every day. It was the pickle you reached for without thinking, the kind that didn't need an explanation. Now for the quirky tidbit. Edo bathhouses sometimes served shiozuke daikon to customers after their soak, claiming the salt replenished what sweat had carried away. Imagine stepping out of a steamy tub only to be handed a salty pickle slice as if it were a sports drink. Whether the science held water or not, bathhouse patrons swore by the ritual. Historians still argue whether this practice was common across Edo or merely confined to a few entrepreneurial bathhouse owners eager to upsell snacks. Either way, the pairing of hot steam and cold pickles paints a vivid picture of Edo leisure. You glance at another stall where brined eggplants shine like polished gems. The merchant explains that some families spice their brines with ginger, kombu, or shiso leaves, layering extra flavors into the simplicity. Others preferred the purity of just salt and water. The beauty of shiozuke was its adaptability. One method could yield endless variations. Scholars debate whether this adaptability made it too ordinary to earn historical praise, or whether its universality gave it an unshakable importance in Edo's food culture. Perhaps it was both, invisible in its commonness, but indispensable all the same. Picture a humble Edo home at dawn. A father prepares to leave for carpentry work, his wife packing his bento. She tucks in a small packet of rice balls, and beside them, slices of shiozuke cucumber wrapped in bamboo leaves. Later that day, when he pauses on a dusty job site, the cool crunch of the pickle refreshes him far more than plain rice alone. It's not glamorous, but it is necessary. In that crunch lies both comfort and survival. Laughter drifts from a nearby izakaya where customers are teasing a friend. "He drinks sake like a whale but eats pickles like a mouse," one says, pointing at the tiny shiozuki radish slice left on his plate. The friend shrugs and replies, "The mouse will live longer?" The room erupts in laughter. Humor seems to accompany every variety of pickle, even one as unassuming as salted vegetables. The scholarly question arises, was shiozuke merely a stopgap for poorer families, or was it a staple even in wealthy homes? Some argue it was a fallback food, eaten when nothing else was available. Others point out that even elite banquets often featured a dish of simple salt pickles, precisely because their plainness contrasted beautifully with rich foods. The debate reflects a broader truth. Status may color perception, but taste and necessity often ignore class boundaries. Children run past, munching on salted cabbage leaves like crunchy candy. Their parents don't scold them. Perhaps because eating vegetables, even briny ones, is better than nothing. For them, shiozuke isn't boring. It's familiar, like a lullaby hummed at bedtime. It anchors them in daily life, a dependable constant in a bustling, uncertain city. As you leave the lane, the taste of salt lingers, bright and bracing. Shiozuke may not shout, but it doesn't need to. It is Edo's quiet backbone, the steady drumbeat beneath the fireworks of flavor, reminding you that sometimes the simplest songs are the ones you never forget. The night air grows damp as you cross a small bridge over a canal, and the smell that drifts toward you now is unmistakably pungent. It is the odor of fish, faintly sour yet rich, mixed with the briny tang of the sea. You've wandered into a district where barrels hold not just vegetables, but seafood, preserved in ways that blur the line between pickling and fermenting. Here, Edo's creativity pushed preservation beyond the farm field, experimenting with the bounty of rivers and ocean alike. The mainstream fact is this: Edo's position as a bustling port city meant fish was abundant, but freshness was not guaranteed once it traveled inland. Pickling in brine, miso, sake lees, or even soy sauce helped prolong the edibility of fish, shellfish, and roe. Salmon, mackerel, herring, and even squid appeared in various pickled forms, some intended to be eaten quickly, others left to ferment until they achieved a strong, savory intensity. These seafood pickles were more than survival food. They became delicacies, enjoyed alongside rice and sake, celebrated at seasonal feasts, and even traded as gifts. You pause as a merchant lifts a lid from a wooden tub, revealing gleaming slices of herring steeped in brine. He explains that these are best eaten with hot rice and a splash of vinegar. You take a cautious bite. The flesh is firm yet yielding, infused with salty tang and faint ocean sweetness. Unlike the crisp crunch of cucumbers or radishes, these pickles melt slightly on the tongue, reminding you that the ocean has its own kind of preservation magic. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some Edo fishmongers swore that pickled mackerel could predict weather changes. If the pickle turned slimy or unusually sour overnight, they said rain was coming. Families joked that their dinner was the best weather forecaster in the city. Historians still argue whether this belief was rooted in careful observation of fermentation changes due to humidity, or whether it was just another bit of Edo folklore blending humor and practicality. Either way, It added yet another layer of storytelling to the dinner table. Further down the street, you notice barrels containing squid tucked into soy sauce and chili peppers. The vendor describes them as not for children, grinning at your curious look. When you try a piece, it's chewy, fiery, and salty all at once, more like a challenge than a snack. You can imagine how such a pickle would pair with strong sake, making conversation looser and laughter louder. In fact, some Edo taverns specialized in seafood pickles precisely because they paired so well with alcohol, sparking the kind of rowdy energy the city thrived on. A scholarly debate emerges about how widespread seafood pickling truly was. Some argue it was common in all households, since fish was plentiful in Edo markets. Others suggest it was more limited, reserved for merchant families or those with better storage facilities. The truth likely lay in between. Everyday brined fish for the common folk, elaborate kasu or miso pickled fish for wealthier tables. The debate continues. But the reality is that Edo cuisine wasn't static. Families adapted pickling to what their budgets and kitchens allowed. You imagine an evening meal in a fisherman's household. The father has returned with the day's catch, and after cleaning the fish, the family submerges extra fillets in brine, saving them for leaner days. Later, at dinner, they share slices of pickled salmon with steaming bowls of rice. The children giggle, complaining that the fish smells funny, but they eat eagerly anyway. In contrast, across town, a wealthy merchant family enjoys kasuzuke fish at a formal banquet, praising its refined flavor. The same technique, different outcomes, different meanings, threaded across social classes. Another vendor pulls out a jar of pickled fish roe, tiny golden pearls glistening in soy sauce. He claims it was a favorite New Year's treat, symbolizing prosperity and fertility. Guests savored it in tiny bites, each grain-like egg representing hopes for abundance. You realize that seafood pickling didn't just preserve food, it preserved meaning, embedding layers of symbolism into Edo's festive calendar. And humor, of course, was never far away. One woodblock print from the era shows a man offering his sweetheart a jar of pickled herring instead of flowers, captioned with a cheeky line, "May our love last as long as this pickle." Was it romantic? Debatable? Was it memorable? Certainly, pickles had a way of sneaking into every corner of Edo life, even the sentimental ones. As you step back onto the bridge, the smell of briny fish still lingers in your nose. You can't help but think that Edo's seafood pickles carried the rhythm of the tides, sometimes smooth, sometimes rough, always present. They reminded the city of its reliance on the sea, of the constant dance between abundance and preservation. And in that dance, flavor became both necessity and joy. You walk through the crowded lanes of late Edo, and something feels different. The pickle barrels are still here, their earthy scents of salt, miso, and bran curling up into the air, but the rhythm around them has shifted. Edo itself is swelling like an overfilled rice pot. Population growth presses against wooden walls, fires keep redrawing neighborhoods, and imported goods trickle in from outside, promising novelties that compete with old traditions. The humble pickle, once the unquestioned backbone of meals and markets, finds itself in quiet decline. The mainstream fact is this: during the late Edo period, urbanization, shifts in agriculture, and new trade connections began eroding some of the traditional pickling methods. Rice bran beds, once nurtured in family kitchens, grew harder to maintain as living spaces shrank in the dense city. Meanwhile, an emerging culture of ready-to-eat street foods and quicker cooking reduced the reliance on long-term preserved vegetables. Families who had once prided themselves on handing down carefully tended nuka beds sometimes let them lapse, turning instead to simpler salted pickles or buying directly from vendors. You picture yourself walking into a cramped Edo tenement. There's barely room for bedding, let alone a heavy jar of fermenting bran that demands daily stirring. The mother sighs, explaining that she used to keep one at her parents' house in the countryside, but here in the city, it's impossible. Instead, she sends her son to fetch a bundle of pickles from the neighborhood stall, quicker, easier, but lacking the intimate touch of a family ferment. Here's the quirky tidbit. Late in the Edo period, some households actually bought pickle insurance. Vendors promised to tend a family's bran bed for a fee, ensuring it didn't spoil when life got busy. Customers could drop off their vegetables and pick them up later, perfectly fermented. It was part food service, part peace of mind, and oddly modern in its convenience. Historians still argue whether these services were widespread enough to affect broader pickle traditions or just a quirky urban side business catering to wealthier families. At the same time, foreign influence began sneaking in. Dutch traders at Dejima had long shared ideas about preservation, including sauerkraut and vinegar-based methods. While common Edo folks rarely tasted these imports, whispers about alternative ways of preserving food began circulating among merchants. Curiosity blended with skepticism. Who needs sauerkraut when we have daikon? One might laugh. Yet the very presence of alternatives planted seeds of change, loosening the once firm cultural grip of traditional tsukemono. Travelers on the Tokaido also noticed the difference. Where once every post station overflowed with local pickles, some began offering quicker, flashier foods that matched the evolving tastes of passers-by. Fried snacks, grilled skewers, even sweet confections gained ground. Pickles, though still beloved, no longer dominated the traveler's bundle as absolutely as before. You crunch into a simple salted cucumber on the roadside, but a boy nearby waves around a sticky rice dumpling, clearly more excited by sugar than brine. Times are changing, and you can taste it. A scholarly debate stirs over how much the decline of traditional pickle beds reflected broader social anxieties. Some argue it symbolized a loss of domestic stability, as women had less space and time to maintain these culinary anchors. Others see it as part of a natural evolution toward urban convenience. Was Edo losing its soul with every abandoned nuka pot, or simply adapting to the realities of growth? The truth, as always, probably straddled both interpretations. Meanwhile, satire and humor kept pace. Popular Senryu poems joked about lazy city dwellers too distracted by kabuki plays and bathhouse gossip to stir their pickle beds. One verse went something like, "My nuka turns sour, while I turn sour too," on the way to the theater. It was a gentle dig at priorities, but also a nod to the reality that people were choosing entertainment and urban pleasures over the steady patience of fermentation. Yet decline didn't mean disappearance. Strolling through wealthier neighborhoods, you still find clay jars tucked in courtyards, tended lovingly as before. A merchant proudly shows you his kasuzuke daikon, rich with the aroma of sake lees. His wife insists their family tradition will never die, no matter how crowded Edo becomes. You realize then that traditions rarely vanish outright. They retreat, adapt, and survive in corners until rediscovery. One evening, you find yourself by the Sumida River. Lanterns reflect off the water, and vendors call out their wares. A young couple shares skewers of grilled eel, barely glancing at the pickle jars nearby. For a moment, you feel the weight of time pressing forward, old flavors giving way to new distractions. But then, an old man sits beside you, unpacking a simple rice ball and a slice of pickled radish. He eats slowly, with satisfaction, as though nothing has changed. The decline of Edo's pickle beds was not a disappearance, but a rebalancing. Where once they stood at the center of survival, now they shifted to the edges of culture, still loved, but no longer indispensable. It's the story of countless traditions when cities grow too fast. Some fade, some linger, some transform into something else entirely. As you rise to leave the riverside, you carry with you the faint crunch of that radish slice in your imagination, reminding you that even in decline, Pickles held on, stubborn as ever, waiting for another era to bring them back into focus. You step forward into the brightness of a modern Japanese konbini, blinking at the fluorescent lights and the hum of refrigeration. The shelves are lined with neatly packaged snacks, bottled drinks, and boxed meals, but your eyes land on the refrigerated section, where slender cucumber sticks and vacuum-sealed packs of pickled plums wait patiently. This is where Edo's briny heritage lingers, not in clay jars on wooden floors, but in plastic trays with barcodes. The continuity is striking. Even as centuries have passed, the craving for pickles, tsukemono, hasn't faded. It has simply evolved. The mainstream fact is clear. Japanese pickles today still hold a firm place in the national diet. They appear in bento lunches, at izakaya counters, and alongside steaming bowls of ramen. What was once a necessity for preservation has become a cultural flourish, a way of adding crunch, sourness, and brightness to modern meals. Convenience stores, supermarkets, and department store basements all sell an astonishing range, from simple shiozuki cucumbers to high-end artisanal miso pickled daikon. And though refrigeration has lessened the practical need for pickling, flavor keeps the tradition alive. You pick up a small pack of umeboshi, pickled plums, each one wrinkled, salty, and vividly red. Once a samurai's battlefield ration, it now hides inside rice balls sold to office workers rushing between trains. That continuity is almost comical. From armor-clad warriors to salarymen in suits, everyone still puckers their lips at the same briny sourness. The quirky tidbit here? Some modern Japanese students swear by umeboshi as a hangover cure after drinking too much sake or beer. Whether it's truly medicinal or just psychological comfort, the idea stretches the pickle's reputation as healer into the 21st century. Historians still argue whether the ancient claims about umeboshi's power to cleanse water or ward off illness were based on real antibacterial properties or just wishful thinking wrapped in tradition. A modern scholar once noted that pickles function as edible memory, and you can feel that truth here. Each flavor carries a timeline. Nuka pickled cucumbers whispering of Edo kitchens, kasuzuke daikon recalling merchant feasts, misozuke eggplants humming with farmhouse rhythms. Even mass-produced supermarket pickles carry echoes of hand-stirred bran beds. Every crunch is a link between present and past. At a nearby sushi counter, you notice gari, pickled ginger, tucked elegantly beside the fish. Though not originally a core Edo pickle, its role today exemplifies how tsukemono adapt. Gari cleanses the palate, resets the tongue, and balances raw fish flavors. In its gentle pink folds, you see the same principles Edo families once valued: balance, preservation, and the subtle art of contrast. But change has its costs. Walk into some homes, and the pickle jars are absent. Younger generations, pressed for time and space, often buy pickles instead of making them. The careful tending of a nuka bed, once a sign of patience and care, now feels like an eccentric hobby for food enthusiasts rather than a household duty. A grandmother might still stir her bran pot daily, but her granddaughter reaches for convenient store packs, no less tasty, but lacking that intimate labor. And yet, just when it seems tsukemono might fade further, they resurface in unexpected places. Upscale restaurants in Tokyo boast heritage pickles on tasting menus, framing them as culinary art. Food festivals celebrate regional pickle specialties, from Kyoto's crisp shibazuki to Nagano's nozawana. Even in the West, Japanese pickles appear in cookbooks, cooking classes, and trendy fusion dishes. The ripple of Edo's barrels reaches across oceans now, transforming global food culture. You imagine historians centuries from now debating whether our plastic-sealed konbini pickles are authentic heirs of Edo's tsukemono, or whether true authenticity vanished with the last clay jar stirred by candlelight. But perhaps authenticity is less important than continuity. Every time someone bites into a pickle, whether it's a wrinkled umeboshi in a rice ball or a crunchy cucumber spear with beer, they take part in the same tradition, stretching an unbroken line of briny delight. For a moment, close your eyes in the konbini aisle. The hum of refrigerators blends with the memory of Edo's bustling markets, lanterns glowing against the night. Vendors still shout, jokes still fly, and barrels still breathe with the scent of fermenting vegetables. The jars may have changed, the rhythms may have softened, but the flavor, the sour, salty, sometimes sweet shock of tsukemono, remains eternal. The journey quiets here, like the gentle hush that falls after a long festival night. You feel yourself reclining, the pace slowing, as if each breath grows deeper and wider. The noise of Edo's streets and the fluorescent hum of today's shops both dissolve, leaving only the soft crunch of memory and the mellow whisper of flavor. Pickles become less about salt or vinegar, less about jars or plastic packs, and more about continuity, about how small, simple things endure even as centuries tumble past. You let your thoughts drift to the cool touch of ceramic jars, the warmth of rice bran between your fingers, the sparkle of a lantern reflected in brine. Every image stretches, softens, and folds into the next, until time itself feels pickled, preserved gently for you to taste whenever you wish. The flavors fade slowly, like a melody trailing into silence. You rest, comforted by the knowledge that even as the world changes, small joys endure. And now, as you sink deeper into stillness, let the last hints of brine dissolve into calm and allow yourself to rest, carried gently by the quiet.